Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 28th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1955. Joshua Logan broke into the Oscar race with a romantic melodrama, Picnic, starring William Holden as a man who disrupts a small town on Labor Day. The film went on to earn 6 Oscar nominations and walked away with 2 awards, but it was the understated romantic drama Marty that won Best Picture and 3 other awards. So why did Picnic come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Picnic. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today we're talking about 1955 at the Oscars. Very, very fascinating year that I'm excited to get into. And I have a new guest joining me today. She is a film critic and assistant editor at RogerEbert.com, as well as her website, MovieMom.com. Plus many other bylines at places like Yahoo and USA Today. Please welcome to the show, Nell Minow.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I think this is going to be a really fascinating look into what people were valuing in 1955 in terms of the Oscars and kind of what we were liking in cinema at the time. So, shall we jump right in?
Absolutely.
All right. So, to get into a quick summary of the movie we're discussing today, which is Picnic, it is a romantic comedy drama based on the 1953 play by William Ing. It tells the story of a man named Hal Carter, who is this unemployed former college football star who travels to a small Kansas town to visit his college buddy, Alan Benson. And while there, he manages to ingratiate himself with the local townsfolk, particularly this mother and her 2 daughters, the Owens, and the 2 girls are Madge and Millie. We also meet Rosemary, who's this brash sort of school teacher who's going out with Howard Bevins, this local store owner, and everything basically culminates at the town's Labor Day picnic, where Hal's reputation really kind of changes for the worse and sets a very interesting series of calamitous events in motion. The film was directed by Joshua Logan and written by Daniel Teradash. It stars William Holden as Hal, Cliff Robertson as Alan, Kim Novak as Madge, Susan Strasberg as Millie, Betty Field as Mrs. Owens, Arthur O'Connell as Howard, and Rosalind Russell as Rosemary. And Picnic made $18 million at the U.S. box office, was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, winning 2, but not Best Picture. So, Nell, what is your experience with Picnic? Your general thoughts?
I'm very fond of the movie Picnic. It was a pleasure to watch it again. I think that just about anybody who loves movies will list among their favorite moments in the history of movies the famous dance sequence in Picnic. And I particularly love the music. Very famously, the main characters, played by William Holden and Kim Novak, begin to dance together to one of the world's great songs, Moonglow. And then a bell rings, and it shifts just perfectly into the theme music from the film itself. And the world really shifts under their feet. Everything changes. You see her mother, played by Betty Field, watching them and realizing that her dreams of basically exchanging her daughter's beauty for security and having her marry the rich boy in town, played by Cliff Robertson, are dissolving. And she's thinking about her own past and her own choices that she now regrets. And that is really one of the great moments in the history of any movie. And I think the movie is really, really well done. But I just want to say generally, and I know we'll get into this later, that as I look at the 5 films that were nominated for Best Picture this year, you really get a chance to understand why the 60s happened, because this was sort of that moment that was after the euphoria of the end of World War II, after the excitement of getting back to normal, getting back to work, and before the real ravages of the 60s. But every one of the films that was nominated in some way deals with repression and misery. And so for those who look back on the 50s as some kind of an idyllic time, if they watch these 5 movies, they'll see it really was not.
That is absolutely true. It feels like we're really starting to sort of question the sort of idea of the perfect, idyllic, suburban sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so, and if to use a 2019 term to talk about something that occurred more than half a century ago, when William Holden takes off his shirt, in the first time really we see him in this milieu, he becomes really quite the thirst trap for everybody.
That's right.
He unsettles everybody. The next door neighbor, played by Verna Felton, just immediately falls apart over him. And it's like the world stops spinning on its axis while everybody looks to see this beautiful, beautiful man. And he is, let's agree, he's like 15 years too old to play the role, but he's William Holden, and we're totally fine with it.
Yeah, let it slide. So for me, I have to say I hadn't actually seen Picnic before this.
Oh my!
So it's just one of these things that I know about the dance scene. I know certain things about it, but I didn't really know exactly what to expect going into this, because looking at some reviews from modern day, it's a lot more mixed than it was at the time. But I do kind of have this sort of predilection for these kinds of films that take place in a small town and we see what's going on beneath the surface. And so I was like, I wonder whether I'll be more positive on this than some others for my generation, because I like this particular genre. So, I'm watching this film and enjoying it for the most part. And it gets to that point in The Picnic. And truly, if I'm being honest, in all the episodes I've done on this show, I don't really think I've ever experienced a bigger disparity between the first half of a film and the second half of a film. Because everything that happens after Rosalind Russell starts dancing with William Holden and tears his shirt is just so over the top absurd. And for me, there's so much good stuff that's happening in the first half of this that sets up a really fascinating examination of not only what's happening underneath the shiny surface of these beautiful towns, but also what's really going on with this William Holden character. And I truly kind of think that some of that is squandered in favor of a lot of melodrama. I mean, first of all, yes, credit to the film for managing to still be entertaining in those moments. But I don't know, it's a weird thing for me where I feel like I was really enjoying what the film was selling for a long period of time. And it's just after that where it feels a little, I don't know, a little cheap to me. But I do want to sort of dive into that.
Well, I let me address that for a minute.
Okay, yeah.
And I was very surprised. I went and I looked up what my great mentor, Roger Ebert, had to say. And he's not a huge fan. He was not a huge fan of the film, which surprised me because I like it more than he did. And I guess more than you did. But I will say this. The reason that I mentioned, and I promise, keep coming back to this issue of repression, is that this movie, of course, was made in a time when people could not be explicit either privately or publicly in terms of the art about the struggles that were going on. Two of the films that we'll be talking about today that were nominated for Best Picture, written by gay men who were more or less closeted, and that comes out very much in indirectly in the way that they, in not just these movies that we'll be talking about today, but in their other work as well. And two of the films we'll be talking about today, the people who wrote them committed suicide. So these are coming from a deep place of anguish. And what may seem kind of melodramatic to us was really just kind of, if I can put it this way, we got to see the bottom of the iceberg rather than the top of the iceberg. They had to kind of make that melodramatic and colorful because they couldn't address the issues that they were really dealing with head on. And I think another thing is that you want to look at Picnic really as, kind of a spectrum, as Hal comes to town and each of the women respond to him very differently. So they're all unsettled by him. Some sort of more happily, some feel very threatened by it, some are kind of anguished by it, some brings back memories. And so I think if you look at it sort of organically, that all comes together as really part of one whole. And I also think that, your description of the film was very much, somebody once said that there are only two stories in films. A stranger comes to town or a person leaves home. And your description fell into that first category of a stranger comes to town. And it was really very much Hal comes to town and he has this unsettling effect on all these people. But I think if I were going to be talking about the film, I would put it in that second category, that it's really a story of someone leaving home. And it's really Madge's story.
Right. Yeah, I was definitely going to get into how the film really does feel like, by the end, it does feel like this was really Madge's story all along, which I do kind of appreciate. Just to get into the first hour or so of the film, again, have to respect a film where the inciting incident is basically William Holden taking his shirt off and irrevocably changing a small town forever by doing so.
Yeah. And it was the bare chest and the boots, I think, are the two.
Yes. And I have to say that the film does have a lot of him taking his shirt off to the point that it's almost excessive. But yeah, I think there's also a lot of interesting stuff for me in the first half of this with how Hal is unemployed and looking for a job at his friend's company, but there's kind of a level of entitlement to him with how he wants this corner office rather than
he wants to
his
use
way up.
Words like enterprise.
Yeah. Because I think he thinks he's above that, and I think there's kind of an impulsiveness and this entitled aspect to him that makes him rather fascinating as a central protagonist.
I agree with you, and I love your word choice there, because to me, the most important thing that he says in the last half hour of the movie is when he tells Madge that she makes him feel patient.
Yeah. Because
he's so impatient. He wants, as you say, he wants to go right into that corner office and have a secretary and make phone calls. He doesn't know anything about business. He doesn't want to know anything about business. He got kicked out of school even as a athletic hero because he didn't do the schoolwork. And yet he has a fantasy of himself. He doesn't want to do the interim steps. But once he meets Madge, once he connects to her, he's willing to go and take that low-level job as a busboy, I think, and he that to me is the big turning point for him. He says, "You make me feel patient." That's such you could see a million movies, and people will express their feelings about being in love a lot, but I don't think you'll hear that word anywhere else.
Right. Yeah, and I did definitely take note of that felt like a fresh twist on that idea, because you're right, it can be, there's so many love stories and there's so many cliche ways that people express that love, but yeah, that is, I think that's a very smart and sort of incisive way of expressing that. And there are a lot of other fun scenes in the first half here, like changing room scene, for example, where the men and the women are having conversations and they're like eavesdropping on each other. Really
and we see
fun
their
stuff.
legs, which is very spicy
very
for
saucy.
that era.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to definitely also give credit to the film for being that sort of expressive as much as they can be within the Hays Code and everything. So there's that. There's that level of sexual angst, basically, whenever, again, William Holden is showing a little bit of skin. And then the scene at the picnic itself, where Madge is crowned the Queen of Niwola, which is
Halloween backwards.
Halloween backwards, yep. It's this weird like town tradition, and everyone's chanting this song in unison. I mean, I was just watching this alone in my apartment, just like laughing, because suddenly it was like this scene out of Midsommar. Where it's just everyone is like chanting this song, and it's kind of horrifying.
Their arms
yes,
in tribute as she comes on the boat with her arms full of roses.
Yes, just
and
wild stuff.
And we never get a sense that, you know, she's like, am I going to be crowned? I don't know. But we never get a sense there's anybody else is competing with her, or that there's any kind of a process there.
Right.
she just literally floats on by. But I think it's worth pointing out that this is a movie called Picnic, and it's about a picnic, but it's an end of summer picnic. And I think that's a very pointed statement about the place where Hal and Madge are, which is, this is the end of the beginning for them, and they've got to figure out what they're doing with their lives.
Yeah. I think when the film gets more specific and sort of weird and off-center with things, it does feel a lot more authentic and real than some of the more melodramatic moments, for me at least. And
well, I want to ask you what you think. When I think about melodramatic moments, when we agreed that we would be talking about Picnic, and I said I would watch it again, my first thought was, I don't think I can handle Rosalind Russell's breakdown again. It's such a painful scene. And yet I watched it again, and I'm glad I did. And she's amazing in it, and Arthur O'Connell's amazing in it. But I'm curious to know what you think about that scene.
That's actually one of the scenes I responded to positively, because that felt very authentic to that character in a way that she
very raw.
Felt so desperate. And yes, it is very raw. She's going to some really deep emotional hurt within herself, and that definitely felt more real to me than some of the stuff where it's just Hal and his friend fighting and then there's this police chase. Those are the things that sort of get a little bit too much for me. But yes, those kind of deep emotional conversations between two people kind of late at night, and they're just confessing these deep emotional truths to each other, I definitely respond more to that, and there's a lot of truth in those scenes, I think.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And Rosalind Russell, one of the all-time greats, and I love that of the actresses of her era, she was one of the bravest in terms of just being willing to do a scene like that, to go all out, to be very unattractive, to play a character like the one that she did in The Women, for example. Or in Gypsy. And so she's so vulnerable in that scene. But, she begins, I don't think we believe her, but she begins the movie by like, I'm just, a happy single gal and I'm fine. And,
right.
I just have this great life. And
I think she's presented as a little bit of a comic relief,
Yeah, but then you just see how agonized she is, that she, begs her boyfriend to marry her.
Yeah, and that comes after she feels a sense of regret over what she did at the picnic. And I think that definitely brings things more into context, and you understand her side more.
No question about it. When she kind of lost control in a very embarrassing public way over Hal, she recognized what her repression, not just sexual repression, but not being honest with herself about what her true feelings were, was not something she could control anymore, and that she just had to do something different.
Yeah, I think Rosalind Russell is fantastic here. And after watching the film, I was like, how did she not get a nomination for this?
Yeah.
Because it has
Yeah.
everything. It's like the classic sort of boozy, unmarried older woman archetype that tends to do very well with the Oscars. You know, she says whatever she wants. She's a scene stealer. She cries. She has so much range with just this supporting character. And I have to say, after asking for the Twitter questions for this episode, Andrew Carden, one of my frequent guests, essentially cleared that up for me because he mentioned Rosalind Russell campaigning in lead instead of supporting.
Oh, my goodness.
And then it all made sense. Yeah.
It does. Well, I'm sure that her character thought she was the lead in the story, too.
Yeah. And we can just touch on it now, even though we're not quite in the Oscar part yet. But there has been, like I've talked about on this show recently, there was this sense as if you were a star, you campaigned in lead. Even if you weren't the proper lead of the film, supporting is saved for the character actors and the young people who aren't quite names yet. And so,
well, of course, that continues to be an issue, and a lot of people thought that Mahershala Ali should have been lead last year.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that Brad Pitt should be lead this year, but probably not.
Right. And there seems to be a lot less of a ego sort of star power thing involved recently, at least.
Yes.
Where, these...
Do you remember
Yeah.
When Michael Caine beat Tom Cruise for Best Supporting Actor?
Yeah.
In his acceptance speech, he said something like, "Tom, you don't want this award. You want the big one."
Right. Yeah. And there still feels like there is a little bit of that idea of the lead one is what you want.
Yeah.
Like how people are always like, Christian Bale only has a supporting Oscar, it's not a lead.
Yeah, I don't get that at all.
Yeah, an Oscar is an Oscar. I mean,
I will take one anytime.
Just saying, I think Glenn Close would be happy with a supporting Oscar. Just gonna throw that out there.
Yeah.
But yes, what I do find interesting about the film is that it isn't really about Hal, like we were saying, at the end of the day. I do think the story is really about this family, the Owens, and this dynamic between Madge and Millie and their mother, and almost like a dynamic between the sisters and Little Women, almost, of kind of these conflicting values, where they're talking about what it means to be a woman in the world, and there's jealousy involved. One of them wants to be more traditional, sort of the homecoming queen. One of them is smarter and gets jealous. I find the dynamic very compelling.
Yes, I think it's very important that we talk about Millie, the younger sister, who I think this often happens in families. They classify their children. That's the pretty one. That's the smart one. When, of course, Susan Strasberg is extremely pretty.
Oh, yeah.
She does a wonderful job with that role. I think she, more than anybody else in the movie, is the stand-in for William Ing himself. Because, for one thing, writers often create characters who want to be writers that are their stand-ins.
Right.
And I think that's what he's doing here. But I think one reason for that is not just that they understand and identify with writers, but because writers, by inclination, by definition, are observers, are very close observers of the world around them. And Millie is constantly kind of telling us what is happening as she's dealing with her own meltdown, her own conflicts. And she would, she envies Madge. I think Madge envies her too, but she envies Madge.
Yeah. And it's so interesting how by the end of things, Millie is the one who is urging Madge to finally take control of her life a bit and act impulsively and just choose for yourself the life you want to live. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Susan Strasberg is really, really, really good here. She's definitely one of my MVPs. I always, she feels like the classic sort of supporting performance where you can miss her when she's not on screen, because I think it's just such a fascinating Yeah, kind of like you were saying, like a bit of a avatar for the writer here.
And the scene of her at the picnic itself,
Yeah.
we just get so much from that as she is making her first tentative steps toward being a woman, in relationship to a man, and dancing with him, and as they sing together in the car, she just is feeling comfortable with a man for the first time. Her mother, I think, raised both of the girls to be a bit fearful of men. It's very interesting when the mother, played by Betty Fields, says that when Madge was born, she was in a happy marriage. They were thrilled to have the baby. But by the time Millie was born, there was strain in the relationship, and that affected the way that she was able to care for Millie. Mm-hmm. And so, they were raised by a mother who had very conflicted and negative feelings about men. And so for Susan Strasberg to be kind of feeling her way toward what it might be like to be in a relationship, I think it's so well handled.
Yeah. And I do think that there is a fun sort of chemistry between her and William Holden. A bit more of a brother-sister sort of relationship, big brother, little sister, but mm-hmm. they just get along so well together that I think those scenes for them together are just kind of dynamite between the two of them. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of Kim Novak here. I don't know if you feel differently. I think her performance in Vertigo I like a lot more, for example, but because I do think that to some extent that character is meant to be more of an enigma. Here, I think it's a little bit hard to read what Madge is really thinking and feeling through a lot of this. And some of the emotion she shows can be a little bit forced.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I think my favorite performance from Kim Novak is a film she made the same year as Vertigo with the same co-star, but a very different tone, and that's Bell, Book, and Candle. Mm-hmm. And I think she suits that kind of cat-like character very, very, very well. But I think, first of all, I think she's a little too old to play Madge. In the play, Madge is 19 years old.
Yeah.
And
I was trying to get a read on how old she was, because I feel like I was being told different things than what I was seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think she's a little old, and so that naivete and indecision of Madge would be much more natural in a younger girl.
Right.
But yeah, I am not in love with her performance, except in the dance scene. I think she's really good.
Yeah, dance scene is fantastic. Definitely. I think it's difficult to portray that sense of inner conflict on film without relying too much on narration or some other device that's a little more obvious. But here I do just wish for me that there was a little bit more insight into what Madge is thinking and going through with all this, because she does end up going through this whirlwind affair over the course of one day, and there's this big decision she makes at the end of the film, and I don't know if the film really invests as much in her arc enough to make that ending choice have enough impact for myself. And I don't know if Kim Novak is able to really make the character feel authentic enough to care about.
Well, that's a Joshua Logan ending. That's not a William Inge ending.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So William Inge did not want to have that ending because, first of all, he was a very downer guy, and it's kind of an optimistic ending, which is not the way he does things. The Splendor in the Grass ending is a much more authentic Inge type of ending.
Yeah.
So you got that happening. Inge himself rewrote the play under another name, and so that nobody seems to like that version, but he was able to put in the ending that he thought was appropriate.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't make sense to you, that's why.
Well, there you go. That pretty much clears that up. Hate when that happens. I feel like we're talking about that quite a bit lately on this show in terms of endings that have been changed, like The Bad Seed, for example. I just talked about.
Yes.
That is like, okay.
But you'll have to have me on to talk about that movie sometime, because I'm completely obsessed with that movie. Can I give you my favorite example of a changed ending?
Absolutely.
That I think very well.
Okay.
Because this is one that people don't know about, but I think everybody agrees is a better ending. In the George Bernard Shaw, when he wrote Pygmalion, made it extremely clear in his afterword. He says Eliza did not marry Henry Higgins. Eliza married Freddie. And he goes and he explains everything about that. So then he was brought in to write the screenplay when they made Pygmalion, and he picked his own Eliza. He was able to pick the actress that he wanted to play Eliza, Wendy Hiller, and it's a great, great movie, and with Leslie Howard, and I highly recommend it. But he's the one who, for whatever reason, either somebody told him to or he chose to, he changed it to leave it ambiguous, but to suggest that possibly Eliza and Henry Higgins would get together. And of course, we all know My Fair Lady, which has that same kind of ambiguous but likely that they get together ending.
Yeah, pretty clear
and
for me, but yes.
I think we all agree that we would be very disappointed if Henry Higgins and Eliza did not get together.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I want to talk about a little bit of the melodrama of the latter half of the film. Like it's that moment where Rosemary's dancing with Hal. He's kind of rebuffing her, and she tears his shirt, and she's saying that he's older than he appears, which is true.
Yeah.
And just saying, and gets blamed for giving Millie whiskey after she gets sick, even though Howard was the one to bring the whiskey. He's basically shunned in disgrace. Madge is chasing after him. They have this hushed conversation by the train, where he's talking about being a screw-up. They kiss, and then they're brawling, and there's a chasing by the police. And for me, I did end up kind of wondering, maybe it is because I had taken a long time feeling like this was Hal's story. I was wondering what the purpose of all of this was and what it was trying to say about Hal, when I maybe should have been thinking more about Madge herself. Because it seems like we're presented with this idea that with what happened at the picnic, everything was sort of this comic misunderstanding. But at the same time, also, he's always been a failure, and yet he's also so charming with everyone. And I'm just left a little bit confused about what to think about this guy by the end of it.
Yeah, both William Ink and Tennessee Williams, who wrote one of the other movies that was nominated that year, have a lot of characters who struggle to maintain a particular kind of appearance. And there's a big disparity between their appearance and their reality. And I think in part that is, again, a reflection of the fact that they were both semi-closeted.
Yeah.
So in the case of Hal, he very much wants to convey an impression of himself as being confident and successful. And we just see that slipping over and over again over the course of the movie. And I think he feels this is his last opportunity to get that office type job, to go find his college roommate, the last person on earth who believes in him. And, I kept thinking of Streetcar Named Desire, because he's like Blanche Dubois. He's trying for that one last chance for people to believe he is as he likes to present himself. And when Rosalind Russell tears his shirt, when he is confronted with the consequences of some bad impulsive decisions that he made with regard to Millie, when he has this very authentic moment with Madge that makes him want to be more true about his feelings, that all kind of comes together. Now, with regard to the awkwardness of the police chase and being accused of stealing the car and all of that, and the scuffle with Cliff Robertson, I think in his first film role, that was something that was in the adaptation for the movie. I think the play pretty much takes place in the backyard of the two houses, and it doesn't move around all over the place. And I think they were trying to figure out a way to make him hide out, and so it kind of got out of hand. It didn't need all of that drama.
Yeah, and some of that's just trying to make a play, open it up, make it feel more cinematic.
Yeah,
You know?
that's what I think. But I agree with you that was not very successful. I do feel bad for the Cliff Robertson character. Do you know who played the part on Broadway, by the way?
No, I know
Paul
that.
Newman.
Oh,
Paul Newman.
damn. Okay.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So how would you like to be? How would you like to be the guy that doesn't get the girl and be Paul Newman?
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
and I know Rod Steiger was right, or no, that was Marty.
No,
Sorry.
Ralph.
I mixed them
Meeker.
up.
That's
Yeah.
okay, Ralph Meeker.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just I think you explained that very well. I think that was definitely the intention behind the arc. For me, it's just I don't know how successful it was in the execution, but I do want to get to some of the technical elements of the film. I want to talk about the cinematography. Mm-hmm. James Wong Ho's cinematography, definitely commendable, especially that dance scene we've been talking about at the picnic between Hal and Madge. I think it really captures the idea of time slowing down. You know, when you see that one special person and you're having this intimate moment with them and everything else just goes away. That's clearly the showcase scene for the cinematography of the film, but I do think it's really spectacularly filmed in that widescreen, and then the way that it pans up into the sky at the very end of the film is really breathtaking for 1955.
Yes, I read that was one of the very first helicopter shots.
Yeah.
And I think Haskell Wexler worked on that shot as an assistant to James Wong Ho. Going back to the dance scene again, I want to point out that, you know, Hal is messing around with Millie and they're kind of having fun. And he's saying, let me show you a step I learned in LA. You know, he's still being the bragging guy. I've been everywhere and I have all these contacts. And then, all of a sudden Madge appears at the top of the steps in perfect time with the music, which let's be clear, William Holden is not. And
that's a bit of like awkward dad dancing almost.
It's terrible. Yeah. And apparently he was terrified. He didn't want to do the dance scene. And it's not like somebody's asking him to be Fred Astaire. There's not a lot of dancing to it, but he didn't want to do that scene. And so he said, you'll have to pay me stunt pay for it, an extra $7,000. And they said, okay. And they gave him a choreographer and he still was very panicky about it. So he got drunk, which of course the character was drunk anyway. So he was drunk when he filmed that scene. But all right. So Madge is coming down the steps and she's got the rhythm. So she's fine. And so, you know, we see how appealing she is. And then they start to dance separately. And then as I said, as the music changes to the theme from the movie, she moves in to that wonderful embrace. And then there's a great moment where he just cups her hand in his. And it's got such an intimacy to it, such a delicacy to it. I just really love that.
Yeah, that's very tender. I love that too. The score gets a nomination, the musical score by George Juning. For me, it gets a bit over dramatic at times in the end, but still, like in that scene, is definitely really adds to the sort of sweeping nature of the film.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't talk about is the only person who got an Oscar nomination from this cast, which is Arthur O'Connell.
Yeah.
On some level, I get why he gets it here, because he is, again, kind of a good comic relief character, especially in the end where he's like getting roped into a marriage. And
he just doesn't know what roped is the right word. He's like hogtied to the side of the car.
Yes. So, you
know, he shows up to say to back out, and that he just doesn't get a chance.
Yeah. So definitely a fun supporting role there. I mean, I understand why he doesn't win for it, but it's certainly very charming.
It's very poignant, but it's, you know, he's not just a comic relief. It's very poignant. I had completely forgotten.
That's true.
The scene
and that's one
in
scene.
In his apartment, if you can call it that. It's one room above the store, where he's looking at it going, how am I going to have somebody else living here with me? And it's, you know, and when he says, you know, all the sort of back and forth between him and Rosalind Russell, as she's, he's trying to wheedle her into taking a slug of booze, and she's going back and forth between being sweet to him and kind of barbs at him, and how he responds to her total meltdown. He really did a wonderful job in that. He was a great actor.
Yeah, and I appreciate the film and the play, I guess, for the story, for giving us that screen time for him so we could see that emotional core, because that didn't have to be there. I mean, a lot of the stuff with Rosalind Russell and Arthur O'Connell didn't really need to be there, obviously, but I think it's definitely one of the highlights. Any other stray observations before we talk about the Oscar run of Picnic?
Yes, I just will respond to the very last point you made and say it didn't need to be there, but I'm glad it's there because, as I said, all these different women are kind of at different points of the continuum. And Betty Field is like sworn off of men. You can tell she hasn't dated anybody since she broke up with her husband. Verna Felton, in the play, they make it clear that she was married, and her mother, who she's still caring for, even though she's got to be in her 60s or 70s, had her annulled. So she just had that very thwarted romance. And then you've got Rosalind Russell, who is, she's at another point on that continuum, and you really need them all to see all the various kinds of yearning, and she has an opportunity to not turn into Verna Felton or Betty Field. She has an opportunity to, as imperfect as it is, and because that Howard is going to be a terrible husband, but she still feels that she's going to be better off with him.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, just to sort of wrap it up, definitely a film that you should very much consider watching if you haven't already. I think you can certainly form your own opinion on the film. We're a bit not exactly opposed, but I think you'll probably get something different out of it than your neighbor, for example, because I do think it's important to keep in mind, obviously, the fact that this is a 64-year-old film. There's some dated aspects to it, but I think on the whole, there is also some progressive elements in how it is very boldly sort of putting women at the center of the story and presenting, like you said, all these different generations of women. And so I think it's worth it. It's on Amazon Prime if you want to rent it. So check it out.
I agree.
So with that, when we come back, we will be discussing why Picnic lost Best Picture to Marty.
Madge, how do you talk to boys? How do you think of things to say?
You just say whatever comes into your head.
Supposing nothing ever comes into my head.
Kid, you better get away from this wall. You're liable to get educated.
Yeah.
I guess I know why you want me to keep on drinking.
No, honey, that's not so. There comes a time in a man's life when he's got to quit rolling around like a pinball. Maybe a little town like this. Place to settle down. Hi.
Hi.
Sore, Benson, but
You saw another pretty girl and you had to add her to your list.
We'll book you for the night, Bub. You got no place to sleep anyway. Come on.
I'm going to jail. No damn jail, see? Beat it, baby. I'm in a pretty bad mood.
Please wait a minute. Alan shouldn't have talked that way to you.
I said beat it. Okay, baby, you asked for it. Baby, what'd you do?
The others, we've got to get back to the picnic.
Do we?
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing why Picnic lost Best Picture to Marty. Picnic was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Joshua Logan, Best Supporting Actor for Arthur O'Connell, Best Art Direction, Color, Best Film Editing, and Best Scoring of a Dramatic or Comedy Picture. And it picked up Art Direction and Film Editing. And before the Oscars, Picnic won the Golden Globe for Best Director, while Marty basically swept most of the other precursors, including the Palme d'Or at Cannes.
Correct.
And the DGA, the WGA, National Board of Review, New York Film Critics. There was basically no suspense about what was winning Best Picture this year.
Right.
But I do want to get into why we think ultimately Marty was our Best Picture winner and why Picnic came up short.
It's hard. It is hard to beat Marty. Marty, of course, was originally, as you said, a teleplay with Rod Steiger. It had was highly acclaimed in that version, and the movie is excellent and holds up very well. It was very much of its era, and yet doesn't feel dated at all. And to the extent that the Oscars represent something like absolute quality, which is a very limited and imperfect extent, I think you could make a very strong case for Marty. I think it would be hard to say that was wrongly decided.
Yeah, that's actually exactly the angle I was going to come at this with, which is the idea of discussing the Oscars and why some things win over the others so rarely has to do with quality. And that sounds bad to say that, but
no, it's true.
In terms of the discussion of why a film can win over another, I really do think this is a case of Marty just being the best film of these 5 and it winning organically. So, I don't know if there were any politics involved, but yeah.
No, I don't think it was very political back in those days, except to the extent that we always have to recognize that this is the industry voting for itself.
Yeah.
And that, this is where I say that I think the Critics Awards have more legitimacy because we actually see everything. And
well, you're biased. Just kidding.
But,
go on.
Yeah, but I didn't say. But the only legitimate ranking is the one that you have yourself subjectively. But we're always going to be interested in the Oscars the same way we're interested in, high school popularity contests, which they often resemble. So I think it's, I know a lot of people, and I'm sure you have had this discussion, will say Crash should not have gotten the Oscar.
Yeah.
The Greatest Show on Earth should not have gotten the Oscar. I don't think those conversations are all that interesting. But I think it is fair to say that of all the films that have won Best Picture, Marty would probably be in the top 20%. It's, it still holds up very well, and it's a great film. I think it's the shortest film to win the Oscar, isn't it?
90 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I do. I think Marty is a wonderful film. I think it's really charming. It has a lot of my favorite emotion, which is melancholy.
A lot of melancholy.
And it's all about this guy who's down on his luck, not married, just a decent human being who meets a woman who's also down on her luck. They form this beautiful connection, and it's really sweet, but also quite dark, There isn't much of a studio sheen on this so much, and it feels very grounded and true to life. And yeah, I have to say that it's great when a film like Marty, this 90 minutes romantic drama, unassuming, can win Best Picture just on sheer quality, not based on spectacle or size or budget or the fact that it's something capital I important, It's just really a lovely universal kind of story, and there's nothing wrong with a film like that winning Best Picture. It doesn't always have to be the big production, and at a time where in the 50s where they were really valuing those kinds of big productions, I think Marty's win here is very refreshing.
Well, I agree with you. And to go back to my original point about how, in retrospect, we can see how all 5 of the films presaged the upheavals of the 1960s, there's no more essential, fundamental element to the upheavals of the 1960s than the one that's presented in this movie. Do I do what I do so that my friends will approve of me or my mother will approve of me? Do I do what I do because I know what's right for me and I know what's right for my own happiness? And am I going to be happy if my friends don't think that I'm dating the prettiest girl in the world? Or am I going to be happy if I am sharing my life with someone that I can have a connection to?
Yeah. That's
a very 60s idea.
Yeah. And it's a really nice time capsule, I think, of what people were experiencing at that time. And to be fair, still experiencing now, but just differently. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it's fear of missing out is what we would call it today.
Exactly.
But everybody kind of, it's almost, people have parodied the idea of, what do you want to do tonight, Marty? I don't know. What do you want to do tonight? And that was their way of being together. It wasn't really important what they did, but they were, one thing that we see in movies over and over, because it's a reflection of one of the core elements of human experience, is the risk of intimacy. Mm-hmm. And you see that constantly portrayed in movies, because most of us are not going to go to war and most of us are not going to start big companies, but we are all going to face that challenge. Are we going to let someone see who we really are? Are we going to be willing to see who they really are? Are we going to accept the imperfections and be there for each other? And that is one of the core questions that we have to ask as people, and it's beautifully presented in this movie.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it does so in the course of an hour and a half, and it doesn't need to be anything more or less than that. I think that's beautiful.
And I think, can we just say a word about Marty's mother? Because I think she's a very interesting character. She plays such an important role in this. He's a very devoted son. Mm-hmm. And
he's a very good boy.
He is. He's a very good boy. And at first, she, like every mother, she wants him to be happy and to get married and have children and do all of that. But then it's her sister, I think, who makes her think, wait a minute, am I going to be by myself? Mm-hmm. And she stops wanting what's best for him and she starts wanting what's best for herself. And that's a very interesting shift in the movie.
Very fascinating. Yeah. And I love how that's kind of like her sister tells her everything that Marty is going to say, and then he actually says all of those things.
Yeah.
And she's just oh boy, here we go.
Well, we have to say a word about one of the greatest screenwriters in Hollywood history, Patty Chayefsky.
Yes.
And nobody writes like Patty. And the example you gave is just a perfect example of that.
Yeah, brilliant. Very much deserved that best screenplay win. That's, mm-hmm. Could not be more deserved. Mm-hmm. We got a few Twitter questions I want to get to here for both Picnic and Marty. Just to go back to Andrew Carden's point, he said Rosalind Russell infamously insisted on a lead campaign for Picnic when she probably could have been a shoo-in down in supporting. So where did she really belong?
I talked to a guy who covers the Oscars, and he gave me this long algorithm for, how many minutes you're on screen and how many words you get to say.
Yeah.
And by that, I think you would have to say she's supporting.
She's supporting. She has a good, meaty supporting role, but that doesn't make it lead. That's what I would say.
Right.
She has a lot to do, but yeah.
About another Patty Chayefsky movie, Beatrice Straight, had the least time on screen of anybody who ever got an acting Oscar in network, but it was a meaty scene.
Yeah, she's supporting here, but again, going back to this whole sense in that time of stars belong in lead. Rosalind Russell had gotten like 3 or so lead nominations before this. She was a star. She was a name, and she gets the "and" credit, I believe, in Picnic. And so,
yes,
I think she gets an "and" as well as Rosemary. So it's a little sprinkle on top there. So I understand why there was kind of like a hesitance to do that, as far as just the politics of the day meant that a person like Rosalind Russell being in supporting would be taking a nomination away from an up-and-comer or a character actor in supporting. So she belongs in supporting. She probably would have won in supporting, I would argue, but alas.
I don't even remember who did win in supporting that year.
The winner was Joe Van Fleet for East of Eden.
Oh, that would have been hard to beat.
Yeah, this is true, but I feel like because Rosalind Russell has not a lot of screen time, but a good chunk of that film, especially in that sort of breakdown scene, I feel like that's kind of hard to beat, so it's tough. This was from Daniel Brilliant, who said, is Marty the only Best Picture winner that was adapted from a TV film? I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah.
That was a different era of TV, but
right, very true.
And to go back to your point, TV was earlier in dealing with some of those grittier stories. Did you ever see a movie with Steve McQueen and Natalie Wood called Love with a Proper Stranger?
No, I have not seen that.
Okay,
I wanted to, but yes, go on.
I strongly recommend it, and it has that same feeling to it, that same kind of grittiness to it.
Interesting. I do like Natalie Wood.
Oh,
yeah, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Let's get to some of these other Best Picture nominees. We mentioned a little bit how there is definitely a theme running through a lot of these, which is this idea of repression and also dealing with the relationships between men and women and love and society and all that grand sort of domestic social drama stuff. Love is a many splendored thing. Yeah. So Jennifer Jones, again, we have William Holden here.
Yeah.
Big year for William Holden. What are your thoughts on Love is a Many Splendored Thing, first off?
I think it's very dated. I think
fair.
of the films that were nominated, it's the one that holds up the least. It's based on a novel, but the novel itself was autobiographical, and the main character has the same name as the person who wrote the novel. Obviously, we no longer, in 2019, think it's appropriate for Caucasian actors to play even mixed race characters. So that's very awkward today. It's schmaltzy, soap opera-y. I can't believe that it was even nominated.
I struggle with this one. First off, right off the top, like you said, we have Jennifer Jones, white, all-American Jennifer Jones, playing a woman who is half Asian. She's Eurasian, which is a choice. And yeah, William Holden. It's the classic sort of trope of these two people who get together from different backgrounds, and then those around them are very judgmental. I don't know if the film has that much to say that couldn't be found in other films better from this era, like going back to what I talked about with 1957, Sayonara.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, I'm glad you mentioned Sayonara because, again, presaging the 60s and the era of the civil rights movement, these are early expressions of the idea of interracial relationships and racial prejudice. And we saw that in Sayonara, where Miyoshi Ameki got the Oscar, and a number of other films, including Rosalind Russell in A Majority of One, with Alec Guinness playing an Asian character.
Yeah, he did that quite a few times. But this film, I think, you know, watching it, I felt like I was wondering why this romance we're supposed to buy feels a bit stilted and unengaging. And then I read about how behind the scenes, Jennifer Jones and William Holden pretty much hated each other.
Yeah.
So
and her husband was his boss, so that was it didn't help.
Yeah. There's the song that keeps playing over and over through the film that wins the Oscar for Best Original Song. Yeah.
Does not hold up well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not a fan. Probably my number 5 of this lineup.
I agree.
And this was from Mark Lamb, who said, how did Love is a Many Splendored Thing get a Best Picture nomination? It did not get great reviews. I knew the title because it had become an afternoon soap when I was a kid. Was it the song? Did Selznick campaign for his wife? I
think it had to do with Selznick. I don't know that they had campaigns the way that they do now, but I think it had to do with him.
Yeah. I mean, we just talked about Around the World in 80 Days and how Mike Todd really campaigned with that one. So I do think there was, on some level, that sort of glad handing and such a little bit. Not quite on the level of what we see now, but yeah, it was there. But yeah, I think there was that, and also this feeling of it being kind of socially relevant.
Yeah.
The answer is I don't really know. I wish I knew the answer to that, because I don't think it holds up really much at all.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Well, moving on to another romance film of sorts, The Rose Tattoo.
Yeah.
Based on a Tennessee Williams play. Anna Magnani wins the Best Actress award for her performance as this widowed woman who basically withdraws from the world. She finds out her husband was cheating on her when he was alive. Eventually,
and he was a smuggler.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
I just want to point that out.
Yep. And eventually she kind of finds love again, sort of, in the form of Burt Lancaster. So, do you have thoughts on The Rose Tattoo?
I don't love The Rose Tattoo. I like, but again, it really hits on that whole issue of suppression.
Yeah.
The relationship that her daughter has with the sailor, where she basically grabs him by the shoulders and says, if you touch my daughter, you're a dead man. And her own conflicts about becoming sexual again 3 years after the death of her husband. I love Burt Lancaster in the film, but other than that, I don't care for the movie much.
Yeah, I liked Anna Magnani in her performance. I think she really pours everything into this part. Very emotional, very expressive. I think the film itself is a little dull and kind of all over the place. Honestly, I don't know what Burt Lancaster is doing in this film. He is all over the place. He is just like rambunctious and ready to go and jumping up and down, and it's just a lot. And I don't know if it's good or bad.
Well, that's kind of what I liked about it. You know, you're used to seeing him kind of literally swinging into the scene on a trapeze or on a rope on a pirate ship. And the fact that he was all over the place, that he was kind of experimenting with trying to be more subtle in this, as his character was struggling with, trying to not be expressing all of his feelings at once and to be respectful of her boundaries. I actually found that kind of interesting. It was a very different role from him. But yeah, he is a guy who impulsively went off and got a rose tattoo.
Yes. There's lots of rose imagery throughout. Really hammers it home.
Yes, it does.
Well, this was from Ronaldo Sosa, who said, do you think Burt Lancaster was good or bad in The Rose Tattoo?
I think we agree both.
Yeah, I think the question is both good and bad.
So, but watchable. I gotta say,
that's true, though, yeah.
I enjoyed him in it.
Yeah.
That was my favorite part of the movie, was his part.
And then the other one is Mr. Roberts. So definitely the most, I guess, comedic film in this lineup. And all-star cast, Henry Fonda, James Cagney, William Powell, Jack Lemmon, all cooped up on a naval ship. And James Cagney is this brutal commander, really disliked by the crew. Henry Fonda is this chief, kind of the more reasonable one. Hijinks ensue. What do you think of Mr. Roberts?
I'm a big fan of Mr. Roberts. Did Joshua Logan direct this one too?
It was like 3 different people. It was one of those things. He
directed the play. I know he directed the play, and I think he was involved with the movie. I love it. I mean, you just gave 4 reasons why. Those are 4 of my favorite actors of all time, and they are all tremendous in it. Henry Fonda originated the role on Broadway. He was very familiar with it, very comfortable with it. And it's got, it's just a very solid piece of work. It is very well constructed. The combination of the humor, the poignancy, the rebellion, the impact that the whole experience has on the character played, the Ensign Pulver character played by Jack Lemmon, and how he changes as a result of his exposure to Mr. Roberts. I'm very fond of that movie.
Yeah. And Jack Lemmon wins his first Oscar for this, and you can see why. It's a very dynamic performance. Kind of, I think, maybe the breakout role for Jack Lemmon.
Yeah,
I have to go back.
He from his very first role, and It Could Happen to You, he was big right away, and should be. And then, of course, he went on to do everything, comedy, drama, Some Like It Hot, The Great Race, and Days of Wine and Roses. I just don't think there's ever been a better, more versatile actor on screen than Jack Lemmon, and he's fantastic in this.
Yeah, it's one of his best performances, I think. He just has a dynamic presence about him that is so watchable for me. And yeah, playing this ensign on the ship, I could definitely see why this would become one of the biggest box office successes of the year, because it's very entertaining. There's such great chemistry between all these guys, and it gets to a little bit of that feeling of like kind of what Robert Altman would do with MASH, just less explicit, but just that sort of brotherhood and that sort of the differences in values and things like that it is doing things differently than a lot of these other films that are centered on love, but it does also get to that sense of like suppression and repression, like you were saying. So the Academy was really, really feeling that sort of internal conflict this year.
Yeah.
Another question from Ronaldo Sosa said, who came closest to a nomination? Henry Fonda in Mr. Roberts or William Holden in Picnic? So they were both snubbed for Best Actor, and
I would say Fonda.
I would agree. I think Fonda. I think that's a pretty big omission, and I don't know if William Holden might have split votes between that and Love Is Many Splendored Thing. Yeah, I just think Henry Fonda probably had more of the gravitas, the juicier role. So
yeah,
I don't know.
And we're still getting movies now. In this era we're still getting movies based on real life experiences of veterans of World War II. So it's still processing. And, I've always been fascinated by sort of the arc of the movies made during and just after the war that were very unambiguous, very patriotic. Not to say that Mr. Roberts is anything but completely patriotic, but it has, to use your word, it has melancholy and conflict,
right?
That is at a level that they would never have been able to make 10 years earlier.
Yeah, that's true. And this is another interesting question from Jackson DeStefano saying, how come Jack Lemmon won 2 Oscars, neither of which being for work he's actually remembered for?
Wait a minute. I think if you ask any fan of Jack Lemmon, of his best roles, I think Ensign Pulver, and of course he made a sequel. It's not very good, but it shows you how vivid that character is in people's minds. And Save the Tiger, I think he got an Oscar for.
Yeah, in lead. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a film that does not stand the test of time very well, but when it came out, it was very much of its moment and was very much appreciated at the time. And I would say the same thing about another film of his that's been completely forgotten that I, sort of made it one part of my life's work to tell people to look at. And that is The April Fools with Catherine Deneuve. Very much of its moment, very dated now. But he's great in it, and a couple of great scenes. And yeah, I think if the world were a perfect place, he would have gotten the Oscar for Days of Wine and Roses.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a tough year.
Yeah,
that was the year of To Kill a Mockingbird and Lawrence of Arabia. But yes,
absolutely. But as I said, it was a perfect world.
Yeah, right.
But as far as I'm concerned, there's almost no performances that he ever gave, including The Odd Couple. I could go on forever of movies that should qualify him. He's just great.
Yeah, I think he's
Glenn Ross.
Yep.
He could have gotten an Oscar for that.
Yeah, and I think he's transcendent in Some Like It Hot. Just one of the best comedic performances.
Oh, of all time.
Yeah,
and I couldn't agree more. I mean, people pay attention it's hard not to Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis. He's absolutely the MVP of that movie.
Agreed.
And the scene with him shaking the maracas. Oh my God.
Yeah. And I think he's
Who's the lucky girl? Me.
great comedic timing for sure. And The Apartment, I think he's fantastic in as well. So,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
we
maybe
should have a whole show just of Jack Lemmon.
seriously though, like he has, it's an incredible career.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much it for questions of the Best Picture nominees. So now we can move on to our Should Have Been a Contender segment. This is where we talk about other films not nominated for Best Picture, any old film that came out in 1955 that we want to highlight. So, Nell, do you have a top one you're thinking about right now?
I have a few.
Okay.
And these are movies that I think are better remembered today than say Love Is a Many Splendored Thing.
Sure.
To Catch a Thief. I have the poster over my desk. It's the only movie poster I have in my office. I love that movie. I think East of Eden, as you mentioned, Joe Van Fleet, did get the Oscar. And I think those are the ones that I would pick.
Just to dive a little bit into East of Eden, because we got a few questions about that as well. Elia Kazan film nominated for Best Director. Sort of this modern day retelling of the Cain and Abel story with James Dean in the lead role. Yeah. He has this kind of rivalry with his brother, and it's a very compelling character drama that I really think should have gotten a Best Picture nomination. I'm sure it was 6th. I don't know why it was passed over.
Well, I mean, as you said, they did get the Best Supporting.
Yeah.
So it was certainly recognized as being a classic.
Yeah. But I just feel like it should have been in that top 5 of Best Picture for me. Take out Love Is a Many Splendored Thing, put in East of Eden, and I would have been good with that. But James Dean, fantastic here, as he was in all 3 of his films. I absolutely love him as a leading man. And it does make me wish, once again, that we could have gotten so much more of him than what we got. Yeah. Just really heavy, dramatic work to be doing on one of his first few roles. It's just extraordinary. And he's modeled after Marlon Brando. He took a lot from him, but still made it his own.
No, he's electrifying in this movie. Yeah. And, it's so poignant when you watch Giant, because he wears some old age makeup, and you just ache because we never got to see him age. Really.
I know. Yeah. Another question from Jackson DeStefano we got is, do you think James Dean deserved to win for either of his nominations, for East of Eden or for Giant, or perhaps for not nominated for Rebel Without a Cause?
Sure. Yeah.
Which one would you have picked if you could give him an Oscar for James Dean?
This is a very personal choice. I just think that his jet rink in Giant is one of the great, 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 great performances. But you could persuade me just as easily to do the other two. But I think that one is just in a class by itself.
I agree. I definitely would have given him an Oscar for Giant. As much as I like some elements of Yul Brynner and The King and I, who beat him that year, I think James Dean is just phenomenal in Giant. Yeah. It's just, that really is the one that feels like the one that you look at and you're like, oof, what a loss,
That scene where he's covered with oil and he comes to the porch and oh my God.
Yeah, we talked all about it last week. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's so good. And then I want to, since we're kind of in the James Dean ballpark, Rebel Without a Cause does come out this year as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's definitely one of those movies that became like this sort of cultural touch point for a generation of people. Sort of cliche to say that sort of thing, but I do think it applies here. Basically kind of an originator of the teen angst movie.
Definitely.
And James Dean, is this kind of new brand of leading man. And the red bomber jacket and the jeans and the hair, so instantly iconic.
Absolutely. And the family that he creates with Sal Mineo and Natalie Wood.
That's right.
And the compassionate cop, and it's really, and the, oh my God, and the observatory. It's just it's a great movie.
Yeah. And Sal Mineo and Natalie Wood both get Oscar nominations for their performances. Very young,
Right.
but very deserved.
Right.
And, you know, not to be too morbid about things, but I think it does add to sort of the mythology of the film that it's these 3 stars who died so young, you know,
Yes.
with so much potential and ahead of them.
Yeah.
And it's this sort of time capsule of the attitudes of what young people were really talking about and what they were concerned with, their anxieties, in a way you didn't really see very much. So, yeah.
And again, as I said, this presages the 60s, because this idea that it's peacetime, we've got this great consumer culture, we're inventing all kinds of new technology, the suburbs are wonderful, moms are at home. What's to complain about?
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that teenagers are unhappy and that they need something more than what they're being given, that's really, as I said, laying the foundation for what we're going to see just 5 years later when things start to really bubble up.
Yes, absolutely. You're tearing me apart.
You're tearing me apart. Yeah.
This was from Juan Carlos Ollano, who said, any theories why James Dean was nominated for East of Eden over his work in Rebel Without a Cause? I would just say I think East of Eden is probably a film that would appeal more to an older demographic of the Academy.
Exactly.
Probably.
Exactly. It's more of a prestige film based on a classic novel.
Yeah.
A literary powerhouse, and the people behind it. And, So I think Rebel Without a Cause, by the members of the Academy, who we always have to remember are old and white and male.
Mm-hmm. And straight.
It's straight, yeah, or pretending to be.
That's true.
That they tend to like to award that kind of prestige film, and would tend to characterize Rebel Without a Cause as being in the same category, say The Wild Ones or Blackboard Jungle, or that's genre stuff. That's not it's not Best Picture stuff.
Yeah, too young skewing. Yes.
Yeah,
and that's still something that the Academy kind of is grappling with today.
Absolutely, but they would say that's YA. If
exactly.
YA had been invented back then, they would say that's a YA film.
Right. I actually want to talk about a movie that got no Oscar nominations, despite deserving a lot of them, and that is All That Heaven Allows.
Oh my God, I love that movie so much. I cannot begin to tell you.
Let's get into it.
Well,
we just
we could have like a whole Douglas Sirk.
Oh yes, believe
sometime.
me, I'm there.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm totally there, and that's probably my favorite Douglas Sirk movie, although not the one that I've seen the most often. I think that The Magnificent Obsession is the one I've seen the most often. I think that is a perfect movie. Mm-hmm. The television just kills me. The kids keep saying, "Yeah, you should get a television."
Yeah.
But
it's presented as like a death knell.
Exactly, I know, which I love because the movies industry in that era was hugely threatened by television,
right? And
It's Always Fair Weather, which came out that same year, was all about how terrible television is in a musical comedy, and but in terms of just anguish and repression and all of the things we've just been talking about, and just following your heart. Mm-hmm. No matter what the neighbors say or what your kids say. I mean, if you got a choice between having your neighbors think that you're a proper person or going to bed with Rock Hudson, what are you going to do?
Oh, my Lord.
Rock Hudson went to my high school. I'm very proud of that.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That's...
And Aunt Margaret and Charlton Heston.
That's incredible. Yeah, Rock Hudson, Jane Wyman, fantastic. Yeah. Electrifying chemistry between the two of them.
And it just, in A Magnificent Obsession too. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And All That Heaven Allows, I do have on Criterion Blu-ray, and I have to say it looks absolutely stunning, kind of restored, and the saturated colors, the immaculate production design, the beautiful houses.
One thing I love in the movie, because it's so metaphoric, is that he is a person of nature of the natural world.
Yeah.
And that comes through so powerfully in his character and in his surroundings when he takes her to his house. Oh my God. All right. I want to mention another movie. I was just talking about this movie this weekend. I forgot it came out this year, and that's A Bad Day at Black Rock.
Yes. I wanted to talk about that one too. Actually, but real quick on All That Heaven Allows. I know you saw my tweet from earlier. Rock Hudson has never been hotter than All That Heaven Allows. I'm just gonna say.
Oh, that's and he was hot all the time.
No, yeah, I know, but he's like this idealized version of a man that you fantasize about running away with in this film.
Yeah, he is. I'm a huge Rock Hudson fan, and not just because he went to my high school, even beyond that. And he is wonderful in that movie. And as I said, it's just so great to have him surrounded by gardens and trees and
Man of the Woods. Yes. Sensitive, beautiful, love it. And Todd Haynes would kind of emulate this film in 2002 with Far From Heaven, another film I love.
Dennis Haysbert. Yeah, I love that movie too.
Yeah. And it does frustrate me, to be honest, to see all of these romantic melodramas in Best Picture when we have All That Heaven Allows right here. I think doing it better than all of them. So getting completely ignored. It's frustrating.
I completely agree. In favor of a movie that we now acknowledge was pretty terrible, and that's Love Is a Many Splendored Thing. But Love Is a Many Splendored Thing had the advantage for this purpose of the racial stuff, which made it seem quote unquote important.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas an older woman and a younger man who is not of her class, that didn't seem important. That was just
women's pictures, Yeah,
it was just exactly. So just like Rebel Without a Cause would be called YA, that would be called women's pictures.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about Bad Day at Black Rock since you brought it up.
Okay.
Also nominated for director. Movie. Yeah.
Yes. Great movie. Like Mr. Roberts, not much of a part for women in the movie.
Well, right.
but it's a great movie. And my favorite story about the movie, which I was telling my sister this weekend, is that they originally did not have the character as being disabled. Spencer Tracy plays a guy who lost his arm in World War II. And then they were trying to entice him to play the role. And somebody said, why don't we make him have a disability? Actors love to play characters with disabilities. And that's such an important part of the movie.
Yeah.
It really makes the movie in such a way. And here we have our old friend Ernest Borgnine, of course, is from Marty, is in this movie. Yep. And Robert Ryan. And it's just a great film.
Yeah, it plays out for me kind of like an extended Twilight Zone episode almost.
Yes.
Where it's like, the one-armed man who comes to a small town seeking answers and uncovering this dark secret that's being kept within this community. Really fantastic, and I love Spencer Tracy in it. So
I love Spencer Tracy.
In general, yeah.
Yeah.
Another big one that comes out this year that does not get any Oscar nominations is The Night of the Hunter,
which is one of the greatest movies of all time.
Yep.
And I can't say enough good things about it. Only film directed by Charles Lawton, with the great Robert Mitchum and his tattoos, love and hate, on his knuckles. And Lillian Gish is incredible in this movie. Love that movie. It's agonizing, but it's wonderful to watch.
Yeah, very dark stuff being tackled here, and you can kind of sense just from watching it why like a more conservative sort of academy might be turned off by some of this. Yeah. But chilling performance by Robert Mitchum, just chilling, and I can't even imagine how shocking that would play in 1955. Just this unbearable dread throughout.
That's perfectly put. That's just what it is.
Yeah. And the cinematography by Stanley Cortez is pretty astonishing. One of the most captivating uses of black and white cinematography I've ever seen, especially that floating on the lake. It's just gives me chills.
Yeah. It's such a striking, wonderful, wonderful film.
Yep. Got 3 questions for The Night of the Hunter. A lot of people wanted me to talk about this one. This was from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg, who said, "Is The Night of the Hunter maybe the greatest American film without any Oscar nominations? Which ones do you think it deserved, and why was it completely shut out?"
Wow. Well, I can answer which ones it deserved. I would definitely have given a nomination to Lillian Gish and to Robert Mitchum. And I think cinematography too. And possibly direction. But why it was shut out, I think, again, it was dismissed as a genre film. It's just a thriller.
Right. It's a B movie sort of thing.
Yeah.
That sort of sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think it deserved pretty much all of those you mentioned, especially cinematography. Like that is a glaring omission, I think. Regardless of genre, it's deserved. But as far as like of all time greatest without Oscar nominations, we did have Amy Thomason who responded to that question by saying Sweet Smell of Success is right up there as well. So there's that. Another one from Ronaldo Sosa said, "How robbed was Robert Mitchum and The Night of the Hunter as a whole?" As we've said, pretty robbed. Nothing really to add there. I don't know if this is a movie I think was necessarily robbed of that much, but I just wanted to bring it up because it's a notable film from this year, which is The 7-Year Itch.
Yeah.
I'm
also a huge Marilyn Monroe fan.
Yeah.
I love Marilyn Monroe. This is by far not her best performance because it's not asking much of her in terms of range, but she's just so adorable. She's so adorable. So I don't think the movie is very meaningful, and it's a bit dated, of course, but God, Marilyn Monroe is wonderful.
Yeah, and it has the iconic Marilyn Monroe in the white dress getting her dress blown up iconography. So yeah, it's another movie that's pretty dated in terms of sort of gender politics, but interesting that we had that becoming these imagery as well as the James Dean and the red bomber jacket, both these becoming these symbols of this era of Hollywood and really enduring, you know?
Yeah.
Just since it's in the news with Disney Plus remake, Lady and the Tramp comes out this year.
Yes, with and I'm very, and you want to know, I people are gonna disagree with me, but I actually thought the remake was lovely. I enjoyed it very much, and but the original is great. Again, a little dated. That's why they had to drop one of the songs from
the Siamese Cat
version.
song.
Yes, but happy to say that He's a Tramp is still in there, sung beautifully by Janelle Monáe. But oh my goodness, I think every year for Valentine's Day, the image that I pick to put on my website is the meatball kiss, the spaghetti meatball kiss. I love that movie.
Yeah, well, it's a rare Disney animated film that is well known and pretty well liked, but also got 0 Oscar nominations.
Interesting.
Definitely really gorgeous animation, and I mean, I guess you could count this as yet another story about romance between two characters from different social classes from this year, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I do think that if there was one place Lady and the Tramp was robbed, it was Best Original Song, because Bella Notte is one of the better Disney songs from this era.
Definitely.
Would have made Peggy Lee a double nominee from this year, could have been, because Peggy Lee is nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Pete Kelly's Blues, and she also wrote the lyrics for Bella Notte.
Yeah, and Love Is a Many Splendor thing is just not, it's a piece of cheese. It's not, it doesn't hold up well.
Yeah, so that would have been nice to see. And Summertime as well, I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Summertime, directed by David Lean, another directing nomination. So I've been talking a lot about a bunch of these 3-hour David Lean epics on this show, but now we're at the point now, since we're going backwards, where most of his films are 2 hours or less. So,
normal, right?
Yes. Regular length, I guess you could say. And Summertime is decidedly not like these Ridge on the River Kwai or Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago. It's a lot more understated than that. Katharine Hepburn and her lovely summer trip to Venice. And it's just a really kind of lovely time. And I think you can tell that she's having a blast in this role, and she's so relaxed and loose, but still very affecting in those moments. It still
fits
that are more
into
tender.
our category of melancholy, yes. Repression, bittersweet.
Yep.
Yeah, there are no happy endings in any of these movies, really, except maybe Marty.
Right. Well, and that's why it wins, maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm still a little iffy on her wins for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and on Golden Pond. And I do kind of wish that this Summertime was one of her wins, because I think she's just so wonderful here.
Well, I completely agree with you, but it just points up what I said about the unreliability of the Oscars as an indication of anything very meaningful. It just has to do with what else is going on that year and the relationships that are involved.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. Just to get to a few questions before we move on to our final segment. Mark Lamb wanted to know, why no major nominations for Oklahoma or Guys and Dolls?
I'm very mystified by that, because both of them had huge cultural impact. Of course, they were both big hits on Broadway and very successful movies, although, they both are a little weird to us now, especially Oklahoma with the Dream Ballet and everything.
Yeah.
But that I am mystified by that, because the Oscars are not shy about awarding musicals, and particularly ones that have been successful on Broadway. So that is a mystery.
Yeah. So like Oklahoma gets about 4 nominations, but none of them are in the major categories. Maybe it's just, it wasn't necessarily what the Academy was super into in this particular year at this time. And like we've been saying, they were more interested in other kinds of sort of domestic romantic dramas, not necessarily the big splashy sorts of films like this. But it's really hard to really diagnose exactly what it was that didn't resonate with these two, because I would say that they're both pretty well regarded, right? And so it's hard to say.
I think both considered classics.
Yeah.
I'll say that Guys and Dolls is very much a Goldwyn movie, and not, as opposed to, say, an MGM musical. In other words, the people in the movie were not necessarily singers. Marlon Brando.
Yeah, right.
Gene Simmons.
Yeah.
But I am hugely fond of it, and that opening song is the way that it's filmed is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't seen Guys and Dolls in a very, very long time, but I should definitely rewatch that. But Oklahoma is also, the Dream Ballet goes on for a long time, and it's a little weird, but it's also very beautifully photographed. So I don't know. Yeah, hard to say. But really quick, there's one international film I wanted to talk about from this year, and which that is Yujutsu.
Yes.
Going back to some of the haunting black and white cinematography. We have this, which is this Japanese film directed by Kenji Mizoguchi, and gets a lone costume design nomination here. So at least it gets on the board, but deserves so much more. It's very much this tragedy about man and this need for wealth and power, and how this kind of like narrow-minded focus will always result in losing the ones you love, pretty much. It's pretty bleak. There's a spiritual sort of mystical element to the film as well, and a real gut punch of an ending.
What did win Best Foreign Language that year?
That was Samurai: The Legend of Musashi.
Okay.
Yeah, which is from Japan. And this is since we mentioned with the 1956 episode, that was the first year of foreign language film category being competitive. So 1955 and earlier, we have just special achievements, sort of non-competitive awards for foreign language film. So
Smiles of a Summer Night also came out the same year.
Yes.
Another good one.
And this, just to get back to Yujutsu real quick, for Ian Balakala question, said, it's great to see that Yujutsu gets nominated for costume design. I think it should have also gotten a cinematography nomination. What movie would you take out to put Yujutsu in for that category? To remind you, the nominees for that category in cinematography black and white were Blackboard Jungle, I'll Cry Tomorrow, Marty, Queen Bee, and The Rose Tattoo.
That is a tough one. Maybe Blackboard Jungle.
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Tough because I think those are all pretty good, but
yeah.
I don't know if we have any more questions. So, did you have any more films you wanted to talk about?
Nope.
Yeah. So, really quite an interesting year once you dig kind of beneath the surface of some of the Best Picture nominees.
Mm-hmm.
So when we come back, we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Marty deserved Best Picture or if maybe perhaps Picnic should have taken it.
Now the nominees for Best Picture of the Year. Love is a Many Splendid Thing, 20th Century Fox, produced by Buddy Adler. Marty, Hecht Lancaster, United Artists, produced by Harold Hecht. Mr. Roberts, Warner Brothers, produced by Leland Hayward. Picnic, Columbia, produced by Fred Colmar. The Rose Tattoo, Hal Wallace, Paramount, produced by Hal B. Wallace. The winner is Marty, Harold Hecht.
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing whether we think Marty deserved Best Picture or if Picnic should have taken it. Nell, what is your verdict?
Definitely Marty.
Mm-hmm.
I am fonder of Picnic than you are, but I agree that you correctly identified some of its failings. Marty is just a perfect little movie, and I love the fact that it got not only Best Picture, but it was one of only 2 films to get both the Palme d'Or and Best Picture, and that it's such a modest little film in every way, in its length and its presentation. It doesn't have glamorous actors in it. It just tells a very heartfelt story, and I think it is one of the all-time classics. It's a great movie.
Yep. I will co-sign that. Marty deserved Best Picture 100%, and I don't think any of these films, even if there are good qualities about a lot of them, I think Marty is just operating on a different level and is just the correct choice at the right time. And I think of all these films, it has definitely stood the test of time more. So Marty is the correct winner.
Right.
Thank you so much, Nell, for joining me. I think this was another wonderful discussion, and I'm glad we could chat about this fascinating year at the Oscars.
I enjoyed it very much, and it was fun to visit not just those movies, but that era and really see some of the things that America was thinking about that we would see reflected in other parts of the culture just a few years later.
Exactly. Like I said, sometimes the Oscars, you can have some faults with them, but at the same time, you can look at these and you can see what people were thinking about and engaging with and prioritizing at the time. So always love them for that reason.
Me too.
Yes, thank you, Nell, and tell the people where they can find more from you on the internet if they so choose.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Movie Mom, on Facebook at The Movie Mom, at moviemom.com, and of course at rogerebert.com, where I'm one of the editors, and I'd love to hear from you anytime.
Excellent. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Go to Apple Podcasts if you want to rate, review, or subscribe, I should say. And you can also, if you like what you hear and want to hear even more crazy Oscar stuff, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is. Just had a great discussion on Capote, and next week we're talking about Sideways. So come on over there if you want to have some fun in the 2000s. So once again, thank you, Nell.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.